Welcome to Answers Unleashed, a talk show to help you reshape your brain with science and faith to find the answers in front of you. I am your host, Olympia Lapointe. Now, I really thank you for tuning in today. We are excited because I got a letter. It was a letter through LinkedIn, and it was asking me how to answer this question. And so if you know anything about Answers Unleashed, this is a show to help you reshape your brain with science and faith so you find the answers in front of you. And so part of our show is making sure that you have information and answers in all these different areas of your life. And we take callers' questions and we take people who write in their questions as well. So today's episode is dealing with, get this, becoming an astronaut. Have you ever wanted to become an astronaut? Well, if you have, you're in the right place. And it all stems from one letter that I got through LinkedIn just yesterday. And this is the letter. It actually comes from India. Can you believe it? We have listeners in India. This is like so exciting. And I hope I say your name right. It's Pujithya Duramanti from India. And so this is what was written. I am an Indian student. I aim to become an astronaut. Can you guide me on how I get closer to my goal? I love electronics. How can I prove myself as a suitable candidate? I'm in my first year of engineering. Can you suggest where I shall start an internship, or how do I take courses so I can get closer to my goal? Do you know what? Thank you so much for writing into Answers Unleashed and asking that question. And I know there's a lot of people that want to become astronauts. There's a lot of people out there. I did never want to become an astronaut. You know why? Because you have to sit on top of explosives to get into space. People don't think about that, but really you're sitting on top of explosives, and you pray that all the technology was done correctly so you can actually launch out into space. And so thank you for this question. And I have actually some tips, and I have tips that come from a couple places. It comes from space.com, which is a article I posted on my facebook.com/Olympia Lapointe site, as well as it comes from the NASA website itself. And so there is a process to become an astronaut, and it all stems from an experience. And I'm going to share this experience, this real life experience with you. I was at church the other day, and I ran across this guy, and he was like 6'5", really, really tall guy. And I talked to him. He said that he always wanted to become an astronaut, but he thought he was too tall. And I thought to myself, no, there's tall astronauts. And he's like, well, no, I've never seen any tall astronaut. And then I racked my memory. I thought to myself, have I seen a tall astronaut? And the answer was yes. It was back, I want to say it was like 2002. And it was during STS-109. It was the Space Transportation System NASA launch, STS-109. And it was in Florida. And I had just been invited as a special guest to see a launch close up. And if you listen to this story, you'll be amazed with what I learned. I went to this show, and it was like all this meet and greet, and I was brought on through a guest, and Marguerite Morgan Cargo, she was at the time an engineer that I worked with, and she was being honored, and she brought me as her guest since her son could not go. And I was really young. I was in my early 20s. And I remember going to this event, and we were at a meet and greet event before the launch, the day before the launch, and I saw this very tall man, good looking man, actually. I can laugh about this now. It's 20 years later. But it was like this really good looking man. Oh, and then I looked closer. And do you know what he had on? A blue jumpsuit. He was one of the astronauts right there. And I looked at him, and I thought to myself, that's odd. He's tall. Now, if you have ever used to seeing the astronauts, at the time, I was used to seeing astronauts that were my height. I'm 5'9". I am quite tall as a woman, but I usually see astronauts that were women that were shorter or men that were 5'9", maybe 6 feet at most. But he was tall. And I looked at him, and I always find tall men attractive. I think they're just beautiful creatures on the face of the planet. And so this tall man was wearing this blue astronaut jumpsuit. And I thought to myself, oh, that is amazing. He's tall. And I thought to myself, oh, that's so odd. I usually don't see tall astronauts. And then that brings me back to Paolo Nespoli. Now, who I met that day, his name was Paolo Nespoli. Paolo Angelo Nespoli. I met him, and he was so kind, and I met a lot of different astronauts there, and I have pictures of that from 20 years ago. It was one of the best events I ever went to. And afterwards, my host, the one that brought me on this trip, she and I went back to the hotel that we were staying at. We were at Cocoa Beach, Florida. And the next day was going to be the launch, or the next day, or I think it was the next day was going to be the launch. And we walk into this hotel lobby, and it was after the event, and I see the tall man again, but this time he doesn't have his blue astronaut suit on. He's in regular clothes. And I look, and I'm like, oh, that's the tall astronaut. And I immediatally go over to the tall astronaut, and I say, hi, you are the astronaut. He probably thought I was crazy, but it was the most amazing experience because it is through him that I met my closest and dear friend, Robert Kirby, former astronaut that I have kept in contact with for years. So it is through Paolo Nespoli that I had the ability to, one, find out a little bit more about the space program, and two, be introduced to his good friend he was actually his coach and his trainer at the time. He introduced me to his trainer that ended up being one of my dearest friends for decades to come, and the ones that you see on my website, and the ones that has endorsed both of my books. So let me tell you about Paolo, and let me tell you how this story is going to come to a full circle. Now, I'll give you a little information about Paolo. He's 61 right now, and he started off being an astronaut in his early 40s. Now, this is something that's quite odd. Most astronauts, when you think about their training and everything else like that, you think that they'll enter the astronaut academy earlier, but no, he wasn't. He actually entered a little bit later. He's Paolo Angelo Nespoli. How do you say it? I wonder how the Italians say it. Nespoli. He is an Italian astronaut who was in and is an engineer for the European Space Agency. In 2007, he first traveled into space aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery as a mission specialist of STS-120, and STS stands for Space Transportation Systems. He was born 1957, April 6, and he's 61 years old right now. So when I met him, he didn't know whether or not he was going to go into space. And I asked him, I said, but you have your you have your blue astronaut suit on. You're not an astronaut? He goes, no, we're not officially an astronaut till we actually fly in space. And then that opened up a series of questions like, what do you go through? Now, to answer your question, how do you become an astronaut? This question began to be answered 20 years ago when I sat down next to him and next to Robert Kirby and a couple of different coworkers at the company I was working with at the time, the Boeing company. And we were in this hotel lobby. It was a bar hotel lobby. And I had the opportunity to just sit down and talk to Paolo and to Robert Kirby and just pick their brain to find out what was it like and what is it like. So here's the first thing you need to know. If you want to become an astronaut, you have to know the qualifications. No matter your background, there's one thing that you have to have, and you can't get around it. It is at least, and I say at least, a bachelor's degree in engineering, biological sciences, physical sciences, or mathematics. Da-da-dum. Now, it doesn't matter your background. You can be in the military or you can be a civilian. It doesn't matter what country you live in. You will have to have a degree in one of those areas. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the qualifications to be a American astronaut. Now, these qualifications to be American astronaut is quite strict because there's only 3 countries who have created manned space flight and flown them in outer space. And the 3 countries is Russia, the United States, and China. All these 3 countries have created what we call a manned space vehicle, which is a vehicle that had safety regulations that was strong enough to be able to ensure a safe flight so someone could go into outer space and back. Now, this isn't something that is a light ordeal. It has so many different regulations. And so these regulations from the United States is part of one of the strictest regulations it takes to actually become an astronaut. So I call out these. Now, it's really important to note something. All these astronauts have at least master's degrees. They don't just have bachelor's degrees. They have at least master's degrees. And this is according to space.com. In reality, most have PhDs in the field. When I had the opportunity to talk to my dear friend Robert Kirby, I asked him about how he became an astronaut. He said that he was a pilot in the Navy. And he was, if you can imagine Top Gun, have you ever seen like the old 1980s movie Top Gun with Tom Cruise where he was fighting in these pilot planes? Well, that's what my friend former astronaut Robert Kirby did. He was a pilot in the Navy, and after being a pilot in the Navy, he had gained enough flight time in order to apply to be an astronaut. Now, he had already, I want to say, don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was probably 2 decades worth of flight time that he had been doing before he went into being an astronaut. Now, he said, I'm very fortunate I got in with just a master's. Most astronauts have at least PhDs. And that's what he said. And I remember that so vividly, at being so amazed how brilliant these astronauts are. Now, not only that, is that there is a professional requirement. Not only do you have to have at least a bachelor's degree, but most people have PhDs, mind you. You have to be, this is what the NASA website says, progressively responsible professional experience for at least 3 years in the industry that you are in. You can't just like get a degree and go, okay, I'm going to like go to space. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to know your stuff and you have to progressively be responsible in showing your professional excellence. That is the most amazing part about all this. Now, NASA candidates must pass a demanding physical set of tests. Now, this is just the physical set. There's psychological sets too. And we'll get into that. But let's talk about just the demanding part. And let me break this down to you in a way that is really fascinating. My mother, she always wanted to become a chef, and she went to training to become a chef at the Los Angeles Trade Technical College, the Culinary Arts Department that was there, and she got her restaurant management degree. She went back to school when we were in high school, and I'm so proud of her because she got her degrees in restaurant management and hotel and restaurant management from her studies. And she always wanted to be a chef, and she got a chef job, and do you know what happened? She went in, and she couldn't take it. You know what happened? She was in the kitchen, and she learned that she could not stand for 8 hours at a time without her feet swelling up. Her ankle swelled up so much that she could not stand to perform the duties of a chef. Now, a chef is a person that runs a kitchen. She was running the pastry area. And now if anyone knows anything about my mother's cooking, and some people do, You know, she is a pastry chef. You will just enjoy every single type of food she makes. But she could not handle the job requirements. It was physical requirements that she didn't know she had to do until she actually got into the role, and was disappointed when she found out she could not stand for long hours like that. She eventually created a catering business, and she didn't have to stand for as long hours like that, but that was a lesson for her. Now imagine wanting to be an astronaut and not being able to handle going up in a launch and passing out when you go up into space. Can you imagine wanting to become an astronaut and you can't handle the physical duties or requirements of becoming an astronaut? Suppose you were training for, or suppose I should say you wanted to become an astronaut for years, and then you finally are there and you can't do it. Well, to avoid that, there's a rigorous set of tests, demanding physical tests that are required for each one of the astronauts to pass. Now, just for the health requirements alone, you have to have 20/20 vision. It either has to be natural or correctable through lenses. You cannot be an astronaut if you do not have that. For example, I don't think I've ever had correctable eyesight to 20/20. If you know me, I literally rely on some of my other senses sometimes other than sight. And so if you have 20/20, that's great. If not, it has to be correctable through lenses. The second is you have to have blood pressure not more than 140 over 90 in a sitting position. If you have a high blood pressure, anything over that, it doesn't work. Your height must be 62 to 75 inches. Now, what does that break down to? That is a tall height. It's over 6 feet. I think that's at 6'3". It must be. And it was really interesting because Paolo Nespoli, the one I told you about before, he was 6'3", I believe. And his career, he was the tallest one in that. And he eventually had a lot of training. For example, he became a professional engineer before being an astronaut. He was a private pilot before becoming an astronaut. And he learned to become an advanced scuba diver. Now, you have to be able to go through a litany of tests. Now, when he was in the Italian military, he became a parachute instructor, a parachutist, a person that flies out of a plane. Now, if you know anything about that, your brain and body has to deal with the complete change of pressure and temperature in a short amount of time span. So that indication within a person's ability to acclimate to different elevations and different temperatures through parachuting is a sign that someone's body can actually handle great differences in temperature as well as pressure in just basic launching a rocket. He was a jump master and he was a special forces operator. Now, it's really interesting because in addition to having that, you have to have a body ready to handle that extreme pressure. And before any candidate actually becomes an astronaut, they actually have to go through, once they're selected, let me back up. Let me back up here for a second. Let me back up to one thing that I really need to tell you. If you're in the military and if you want to become an astronaut, you have to have 1,000 hours of flight time. And this is as a pilot in command and time in jet and aircrafts. Now, if you're a civilian, you would never guess that if you are a teacher, you have that years of teaching actually goes into the technical requirements and the hours that you need in order to go towards being an astronaut. So these are things that you don't think of necessarily. Now, once you're selected to become an astronaut for flight, there's two areas. Once you become selected to be an astronaut, you actually have to go through a series of tests, and then once you actually pass those tests, you have to be selected for a flight. When I talked to Paulo Nespoli, he was telling me that he didn't know whether or not he was going to fly, and I'm like, well, you're an astronaut, right? He says, no. Once you're selected, that's one part, but you have to go through a lot of tests. And once you pass all the tests, then they select you for a particular flight. And then if that flight is still on with the mission, that's when you continue to prepare for that particular flight. Now, there's a whole lot of parts about this. There's a lot of reading in textbooks. There's a lot of classroom training. There's simulations on the equipment that's going to be used once you actually go into space. You will fly to various international locations for different training, and you have to bond with your crewmates. Now, when we launched the astronauts into outer space, I was one of those individuals supporting mission control. Specifically, I was in the Rocketdyne Operations Support Room. And it was called the ROSC, Rocketdyne Operations Support Center specifically. And we were in this dark room, and we had these big TV screens in front of us, and we had to check out this data for 12 hours at a time to verify that there was going to be no issues within launch. And finally, within launch, when it was finally a go, we counted down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we launched. Now, it was the most fascinating thing because we were really on. Every single pressure and temperature had to be monitored, but also what was being monitored by the doctors is the heart rate and all the different biological rates of the astronauts. You see, when they're sitting down, not in a straight sitting position for 12 hours before the space shuttle goes out in outer space, they're sitting down with their back parallel to the ground and their feet are up. Imagine dangling with your feet up for 12 hours straight. Most people would pass out because your body has to be acclimated to a type of pressure difference like that. But not only that, when the space shuttle would go into outer space, the space shuttle couldn't go straight towards 17,000 miles and 20,000 miles an hour and 30,000 miles an hour straight. If it would, the astronauts would pass out. You know why? Because there was gravitational forces that push on the chest of the astronauts as they go out into outer space. That force is so strong that there was a throttle back that we had to do in order to cut the power of the engines off, not off, but cut it down in order for the speed to decrease so the human bodies of the astronauts would not pass out due to the force on their chest. If they had 3 gravitational forces on their chest while launching into outer space, they would have passed out and they would have not even been able to control the vehicle. So, now the question is, what do you do? I recommend you do a couple of things. I want you to go to nasa.gov and I want you to look at the application for an astronaut. That's number 1. I want you to go to my Facebook page, facebook.com/OlympiaLapointe, to find the links that I've placed up from space.com and from nasa.gov that tells you all the different criteria that there is. Now, there's so many different things, and we are not even going to get into this. Maybe I should invite an astronaut to be on our show. What do you think? Oh, that would be so good. So if there's any astronauts listening out there that wants to be on the show to talk about your experience, I may have you on this show because we've just scratched the surface of what it's like to be an astronaut. So there's what you're paid is another question about. What you do with the training is another question that's being talked about. What do you do when you're out in space is another question that we talk about. I think we need an expert on this show. What do you think? I'm looking at my producer over here. You think so too? I think so too. So this is part 1 of this show. Tune into us every single Tuesday at 2. This is our third to the last show here on kpcradio.com. We're here on Tuesdays at 2 o'clock for the Answers Unleashed show. Find me on facebook.com/OlympiaLaPointe. Find the last shows. Find this show at answersunleashed.com. And you can always shoot me a message through voice message through 888-88-answers. And we just got scratched the surface of this show. This show has gotten me excited. Tune into us next week. You don't know if we're actually part 2 of this. I may be able to bring one of my friends on this show. We'll see. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Tune in to Answers Unleashed. We're reshaping your brain with science and faith to find the answers in front of you. I am your host, Olympia LaPointe. I'll see you next time.